Hi and welcome. My name is Mrs. Colosimo and today we're going to be looking at texture tablets. We've already talked a little bit about relief sculptures and what those are, and so this video is going to be helpful so that we can better understand how to make texture in these sculptures, and we get to explore a little bit of what texture is and how we can make it using different tools. So let's get started. Alright, so let's go over a little bit of what we're going to be reviewing today. We will be talking a little bit about our tools and how each tool can help us achieve different textures. We're going to look over rolling slabs and cutting out the squares that we need for the texture tablets. And we'll also talk a little bit about what found objects we can use to make these textures and to complete them. We want to be able to complete 6 tablets at the end of this lesson, and I will be showing you at least 4 of them to be able to get some ideas rolling on how you can use, like I said, each tool to create these textures. And I would also love to see you guys explore on your own and find objects on your own that would make interesting marks on your clay. Alright, so for this first part, we're going to be focusing on the kneading of our clay. For those of you who have taken ceramics before, you might remember that kneading our clay is important in order to get rid of any air bubbles that are inside of it for when we fire our clay or when we begin to work on it. So for this part, I would like for you guys to stand up and get a hold of your clay the best that you can, putting both hands on the clay itself. And what we are doing is we will be rolling into it in order to, like I said, get rid of those air bubbles. So we're pushing down and we are rotating our clay towards us after pushing forward and down onto the clay. Now, when the shape of this clay starts to get a little bit long, this is where we can shift our clay and then begin to knead the clay that way. All right, so now we're ready to use our clay. Okay, so for this part, now that we have our clay all nice and kneaded for the use of our tablets, we are going to need our rolling pin, our clay, and we are going to need these wooden tablets as well. So the use of these wooden tablets are going to help us to create an even amount of thickness of our clay when we roll out our slabs. And I will show you that once we begin rolling it out as well. So I'm going to create a flat shape with the clay to help me get started with the rolling of the clay itself. You can make an oval shaped figure with it and kind of pound it down a little bit with your hands so that you can begin making it just a little bit flat so that it's easier to roll out. Alright, so once we have this shape, I am going to place it in between both of these, and I'm going to place it in the middle of both of the wooden slabs. Alright, so we are positioning our pieces of wood at with an amount of space between the clay and the wood itself, enough to create that space so when we're rolling it out, the clay is not running into the wood, and wide enough where our rolling pin can be on top of both pieces. This allows a more smooth transition when we're rolling out our clay, and it lets us just create a longer piece of slab with our clay in order to be able to have it all even, again, with its width. So because both of these are the same width, our clay will also be around the same width of our wooden pieces. So this is where we begin to roll. When you are rolling out your clay, make sure to have an even amount of pressure all the way through, starting from the bottom and pushing it upwards. Now we don't want all of these pounding noises because really we don't need it. We can just control the way that we are rolling it onto our clay in order to get the consistency that we want. All right, at some point, we also have the opportunity to then rotate our clay. So gently lift the clay in order to not create too big of dents. I know that you can see a little bit of my fingerprints on there, but there's still some rolling that we have to do, so that's okay. And after rotating the clay, we can continue to then roll onto our sun. Again, this is another step in this process where standing up is going to be what gives you the best results in order to have control over your roller and control over how much pressure you're putting on the clay. So I'm rotating this one more time. All right, so as you can tell, my clay is no longer moving. There's no more expanding that is being done to the clay itself, which means that we have reached the width that we want for the slab. So let's move on to the next step. Alright, so we are going to use the wood that we used previously to be able to roll out our clay, and we're using this as support and to be able to cut out some straight lines for our square tablets. So we're placing this piece of wood over towards this is my left side of my clay in order to start and get as much clay as possible. Use as much clay as possible when you're cutting them out. So again, this is going to serve just to be able to create a straight line, and we're going to use now a tool to cut it, which is our fettling knife, to be able to cut through the clay from multiple angles. So this is our first angle that we're doing it. We're going just straight down, and even amount of pressure so that you're cutting through the clay, and then you can just remove these and put it to the side for now. Now I want these tablets to be about 3 inches in height and 3 inches in width. So we're going to be placing this on the other side, and now switching our hands, we're going to cut straight down as well. And again, evenly putting pressure so that we have good even cut all the way through. Now this piece I think we could use for more of the tablet, so we're not going to completely get rid of it. Alright, I'm turning this over and cutting again to make third side of our square. Again, I'd like about 3 inches or so. Can be a little bit short of 3 inches. We don't want the squares to be too big or too small. Alright, and I think we can get 2 squares out of this piece of clay. Okay, so go ahead and make 6 of these so that you have different pieces to work on to create different textures. Alright, so now that we have all of our tablets cut out, 6 of them to be exact, I'm going to introduce the tools that we will be using to create texture. The first one being our needle tool. Now this one is going to be helpful when we do our first technique called cross hatching. And second, we're going to be using the ribbon tool, and this will help us to carve out clay and not just carve into it, but actually remove larger pieces of clay. And last, we'll be using the wood modeling tool before we go ahead and use just some objects that we found outside, such as the wood or rocks and bark as well. All right, so back to our needle tool. For this part of the texture process, we are doing something called cross-hatching. Now, the reason for this is because you are doing just that. You are crossing lines with each other by doing first parallel lines next to each other and then going the complete opposite direction and crossing over it. Now, essentially what we're doing is we are just creating different patterns on our clay. This helps us to create depth and to create different values from light to dark. So we can do cross-hatching where things are neat and exact, or we can do cross-hatching where we are just putting together the lines, putting the lines a lot closer together to create a more tighter space. Now this creates more depth and again more value and makes our clay look even darker. So go ahead and practice. You can create lines back parallel to each other like I said before, and then going completely in the opposite direction. Now think about what kind of things might require these. Maybe you are doing a rooftop where you have to create texture on the roof. And cross-hatching allows you to create those types of patterns as well. Again, explore with the needle tool and see what kind of different shapes and what kind of different lines you can make. Now, cross-hatching is just one of them. Quickly, before we move on to the next one, I'm going to just mention too, take advantage of the point. I mean, maybe the types of patterns that you want to make include just doing a lot of different points and different fine circles onto your clay. You can be absolutely random, or you can create specific patterns with this as well. Alright, so now we're starting on to our second tablet. Like I mentioned before, now we're using the ribbon tool. Now this is going to be helpful when we're carving away some of the clay and being more specific on how much of the carving we're doing versus just using the needle tool. So this type of texture I see a lot when we're creating things such as scales or again going back to like the rooftops and using that with that kind of texture as well. So we're going to begin. We are holding this tool as if we're holding our pencil again, and we are using this in order to have more control of the tool and control on how much pressure we're putting into our clay. So what we're doing is we are slightly scraping out some of this clay and removing it and continuing this pattern with one piece next to the other. Now, the type of pressure that you're putting into it, you need to be very aware of and just be careful with, because if we are putting too much pressure, we are then creating holes in our clay. So put enough pressure where we are being mindful of just how thick our clay is and not going in deeper than the clay itself. Alright, so I've continued this pattern in 1, 2, 3, 4 different rows, and like I mentioned before, we have this like scale effect on it, and it becomes very useful when doing things like sea creatures, or depending on what your image is exactly, you take advantage of the type of shapes that this tool creates. Now, this also has a square tool, a more square edge on the other side versus the circle edge. So let's take a look at what type of shapes and textures this side creates. Alright, maybe this tool you'll be using to create depth in the images that you're doing. Maybe it's not for a specific texture, but it will be able to help you to remove clay, or you can also decide to keep the clay on there as well. I know that every time that I carve into it, I'm removing this clay itself, but maybe you are leaving it on there just like that, and creating this different type of pattern as well. So the ribbon tool again is very helpful to be able to remove clay and create these types of sea textures, or also to be able to carve out as much clay as you can when creating depth into the clay. Alright, so for our third tablet, we are going to be creating texture using our wood modeling tool. Now with this tool, we're going to be leaving imprints versus taking away clay. So just the way that you would use a stamp, we're going to be using this tool as well, where we are pressing down into our clay, and again being mindful of how hard you're using or how much pressure you're putting into the clay. You can make this texture a pattern, or you can use it a little bit more random. What I like about these texture tablets is that you guys are going to be able to essentially just explore. There is no right or wrong way. As long as you're using these tools safely, then you can create as many marks as you want in the shapes that you want and explore that way. So again, maybe we're using this more as a stamp than to carve away clay, but this will give us just a different type of effect when creating texture. So again, this can be pattern or more random. The more that you shift your tool, the more textures you may discover. Alright, so we're moving forward to our fourth tablet. I will be requiring everyone to be doing 6 tablets, but today we'll be just going over 4. And honestly, this is going to be my favorite one. So the reason for this is because we're not using any specific tools. Instead, I got to go outside and I just picked up some random materials off the ground that would make some cool textures, or that I felt would leave some awesome imprints on it. So one of the things I grabbed was just a stick, some bark, different shaped rocks as well, and just another different branch that I grabbed off of a tree. So I'm going to start with this bark because I'm really excited about it. We can use this for a lot of different things. One of the main things that we can do is we can take advantage of the fact that we can take bark and then recreate this texture when we're doing maybe an image of a tree. I mean, this is exactly what bark looks like, so there's no reason why we couldn't just use it. So we are going to be laying this down and again applying some pressure to it, but just make sure that you are not pressing down too hard, but just slowly pushing it down into the clay to make the different texture. I think what's exciting about this is that we don't really always know what it's going to turn out, what it's going to look like in the end, or how it's going to turn out. but as you can see, we can get very cool shapes in it as well. So you can do this more than once if you have to cover a large area. And that way you cover a lot more than just one little strip. All right, so now we're gonna try this rock. I mean, this has different textures as well as, very different than our bark, excuse me. But again, we don't wanna press down too hard so that it doesn't go completely through. And by that I mean if we're doing it like this, I'm gonna just flip it so you guys can see, you start to kind of destroy your clay that way. But let's continue to make marks using the objects we find outside. All right, so for the sticks, I kind of just want to use different smaller pieces from it. And I'm going to be putting it into the clay again and just being careful with how hard I'm pressing on it. But again, you're getting such cool texture when you get to use actual texture from outside and include nature in your work. All right, so this was our last tablet. And honestly, like I said, this is probably my favorite one. We get some awesome texture and we get to explore different places wherever we go and search for our different materials. So that is it for our tablets. Please make sure that you do 6 of them. And again, you are not limited to just what you're finding. Be safe, use your tools safely, and have fun on any adventure that you may go on looking for different things to use. Okay, so that's a wrap. We've got everything from different textures using bark, rocks, using our different ceramic tools, and so I think you're ready. We can now move forward and start creating different textures, and like I said before, continue to think about what your images look like and what textures are included in these images. So the next step is to create your bigger slabs to start your images. So I want you to go out and explore and have fun with this. Bye guys!